4. In that sermon, Peter proclaimed, but God raised him up again, putting an end to agony of death, since it was impossible for him to be held by its power. How do we know that Jesus was really resurrected from the dead? We've talked about that before in many other passages. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says that the resurrected Christ was seen by over 500 witnesses at a single time. Or think about the amazing transformation that occurred in such a short period of time in the disciples. I mean, Friday afternoon, they had scattered like rats off the sinking ship. They were scared to death, starting with Peter. And yet, overnight, 3 days later, they were transformed into courageous defenders of the faith. I mean, here is Peter 7 weeks later, standing before the crowd that he ran from earlier and saying without hesitation, this is the Christ, and I'm willing to give my life for him. How do you explain that change in the disciples? Or think about the changes that occurred in Judaism. I mean, Judaism had been practicing the same laws and traditions.
Easter was on May 31st. Today is April 2nd. Give you context.
Overnight, there was a seismic change in Judaism. They changed their day of worship, thousands of them, over a period of just a few days, from Saturday to Sunday. They gave up many of the practices of the Old Testament. Sociologists tell us that it takes decades, if not centuries, to have changes in religious traditions, but it happened here overnight. How do you explain it? There is no explanation except for something seismic happened, the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. What do you say about the empty tomb? You know, people say, well, the disciples stole the body. That's the easiest explanation. That makes no sense. They had no courage to defeat a Roman guard unit of 16 men. Other people say, well, what happened was the Jewish leaders or the Roman leaders, they stole the body. That makes even less sense. They wanted to keep that body in the grave. Remember, the Jewish leaders came to Pontius Pilate Saturday after the crucifixion? They said, Pilate, we've got a problem. We've got to secure that grave where Jesus is, lest the disciples come and steal the body and say he's risen from the dead as he predicted, and the last deception will be worse than the first. And Pilate said, okay, you got your guard, a guard unit, 16 men. They didn't want that body going anywhere, lest the claim that Jesus was the Lord be validated. No. The disciples didn't have the courage to steal the body. The leaders didn't have the motivation to steal the body. There's only one explanation for why even today the body of Jesus Christ has not been discovered after 2,000 years. Only one explanation, and that is God himself reached down into that grave and rescued his son from the jaws of death. And one day he'll do the same for you and for me. That is the only explanation. The fact that Christ was raised from the dead shows he was who he claimed to be. The patriarch Job asked what perhaps is the most simple but most profound question of all time. If a person dies, will he live again? Don't you agree that's the bottom line question? When you strip everything away from life, the real question that affects us all here today is this life all that there is? Or is there an existence beyond death? If a person dies, will he live again? If my wife or husband dies, will they live again? If my child dies, will they live again? My father died 30 years ago.